it just, yeah, on all the success measures have been placed outside instead of inside.
Absolutely.
And so we're chasing after these illustrious things that we've been told, oh, you do this, you get this, and then you'll feel better. But you get this and you don't feel better, and then you feel worse. And you're further and further and further from yourself. And then there's this conditioning around this like binary state of consciousness, as if things are either right or wrong. And this is what I say to clients all the time. There ain't no right or wrong. It's just conscious or unconscious. Conscious choice or unconscious choice. And the mainstream sort of like vibration is unconscious autopilot, just doing. And I don't even mean that from a place of like judgment and contempt, but more of like, oh, makes my heart ache, because the unconscious sort of autopilot is fueled by the systemic like indoctrination, like flood of messages around doing and getting and receiving. I could go on and on, but it's all sort of coming from the wrong. It's external, not internal.
Well, right. And this culture has created an environment where we have to survive because we live in a benevolent universe. We have extreme abundance on this planet, and it is so imbalanced. It is so wildly unbalanced, and that's based on our productivity. When we could easily be feeding everyone in the world, we could easily be tapping into like the beautiful resources of the world. And instead, we're just going with greed and capitalism and how much we can like produce and how much more money we can make. And, you know, I think that when our needs are met, it's not our, you know, lifestyle needs. It's not like, you know, how many cars can we have? It's our true nourishment. Like, what is the nourishment of the soul? That's the needs. When we're met with understanding and empathy and compassion for our trauma, then we have that nourishment of the soul where we're not reaching for the addictions because we're not being told that we're wrong, or, you know, our inner critic is getting bigger, or we're judging ourselves because we're not doing it right. I mean, so what we're talking about here is the catalyst to the soul's evolution. And basically my take on plant medicine, but you're doing plant medicine and psychedelics. So that's the MDMA. Because I've been doing this work, this John Barnes work, for over 20 years. And the moment that I had my first body unwinding, it was the moment I went into my true source energy and transcendence. When your body releases traumas from lifetimes, from parallel lifetimes, from this lifetime, from generations before you, the traumas of your ancestors, we've never experienced that in this world, or in this culture, in this life. And our linear mind control suppresses it. So when you learn this work, when you can tap into that source energy, you actually have to learn to turn the brakes off. And the brakes are our mind, and it's our control. And that's everything we've learned how to live our lives is through control. So it's a big switch. But when you can actually access that switch, it becomes real easy. And so what I've noticed with psychedelic therapy and plant medicine is that's the switch. So it actually bypasses like learning how to do it ourselves. And it gives us that catalyst in the beginning to getting past the mind control, like getting into the source energy. Right. And so that's what I want to talk about a little bit more, because I found it naturally. I found it through this body unwinding. And also, I do feel like we have a culture that's so deeply ingrained in these dangerous narratives and messages that I can appreciate that we have these ancient medicines to actually access the source energy that can give us a path to doing it on our own. So can you get a little deeper into that journey?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing I'll say is to just like affirm that I think it is absolutely reachable, attainable, doable, achievable, whatever verbiage you want to use, in ways that don't incorporate psychedelics. Because the psychedelics aren't the magic is the spirit. The psychedelics, as with any modality of healing, body work, therapy, is a conduit to tap into that potentiality within self.
Mm-hmm.
What I think is happening with psychedelics, and there's a couple of things. So I specifically work with MDMA, which is not a plant medicine, so to speak, but it functions in a similar way as psychedelics. So it's kind of put in that larger category. I also work with psilocybin. They're very different medicines. So I'll just speak a little bit to why do I use which one when, because this is part of the response to your question. So if a client comes to me and they have profound trauma from specifically a sexual variety, specifically early childhood, like formative years of safety that got hijacked by trauma. And I can see and recognize pretty quickly that they're suspended in a kind of state of fight or flight. Then I will suggest almost always, unless it doesn't, there's like a strong disconnect for them, that they start with MDMA. And here's why. MDMA specifically works in conjunction with the amygdala in the brain. The amygdala is sort of the control center, if you will, of fear responses, which often, as we've alluded to throughout the conversation, manifest as attempts to control. Because that's its job, to keep us safe. But what happens when we have these really intense violations in early childhood or around our most sacred sexuality part of self is the amygdala gets stuck in fight or flight response. The amygdala cannot differentiate time. It's not like a linear machine. It's just that happened and I'm frozen there. So what you see is that people are constantly living in that place. And they may have moments of like, aha, in profound body work, in a therapy breakthrough session. But once they step out of that like really controlled container, their body goes back to fight or flight. Because the neural pathway in the brain is set at that. And it's been there for however many years since that trauma happened. So what we know from research is that to actually form a new neural pathway in the brain that then becomes one that will be repeated consistently takes time. And so the power of using a tool like this is that it helps to expedite that process by allowing the person's amygdala to sort of step back, and the wounded spirit can sort of come forward, and a kind of recalibration process takes place. And from that experience, the net result is a new neural pathway that's established and actually like kind of a paved path. And so then with the right sort of support and post-integrative care work, you can really go back and continue to pave that path to make it more accessible, so that when the person is in real time and space in their life, they're like, oh yeah, I have a new path. I actually want to try that one instead of the old one, because the old one is really familiar, but it makes me feel like shit. So that's really powerful. So maybe I'll pause for a minute, because that in and of itself is a lot of information. And then I can tell you more about psilocybin, but I give you a chance to ask any questions that you may have.
Right. Yeah. I think everything that you're saying is so important for people to hear, because, I mean, there's studies It's like we know so much within ourselves, but we have this reliance on studies because we've been so trained to be like in mind control. But there are studies about depression and how they create those neural pathways, and that becomes normal. So we actually get really comfortable in our pain because we have a culture that celebrates our pain. that like
Yes.
that lends to us staying in our pain, and then it becomes really hard to find the avenues and the pathways out of our pain, because we don't have like the energy to create a new practice that takes the time to get us to the new neural pathway.